reference to Jesus would be heard differently by Jewish listeners. Furthermore, our understanding of Moses can emphasize him liberating the people from slavery or presenting the Ten Commandments, which can lead us to view him as liberator or legislator. Horeb refers to the mountain of revelation, which is also called Sinai. Let us listen to the words the author puts on Moses' lips in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 20. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet, like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet. This is what you requested of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, if I hear the voice of the Lord my God any more, or ever again see this great fire, I will die. Then the Lord replied to me, they are right in what they have said. I will raise up for them a prophet, like you from among their own people. I will put my words into the mouth of the prophet, who shall speak to them in everything that I command. Anyone who does not heed the words of the prophet shall speak in my name. I myself will hold accountable. But any prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, who presumes to speak in my name a word that I have not commanded the prophet to speak, that prophet shall die.
In our gospel reading this morning, we find Jesus at Capernaum, the town of Nahum, which would become Jesus' own city on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. There, the people in the synagogue, as he teaches, become dumbfounded. But a sick man with an unclean spirit recognizes him immediately and is blessed, apparently increasing the uproar. We can ask ourselves if we would recognize Jesus or if we would simply stand around with our mouths open if he were to come here and do here what he did there. Let us listen closely for the good news for us today in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verses 21 through 28. Reading from the Message. Then they entered Capernaum. When the Sabbath arrived, Jesus lost no time in getting to the meeting place. He spent the day there teaching. They were surprised at his teaching, so forthright, so confident, not quibbling and quoting like the religion scholars. And suddenly, while still in the meeting place, he was interrupted by a man who was deeply disturbed and yelling out, "What business do you have here with us, Jesus, Nazarene? I know what you're up to. You're the Holy One of God, and you've come to destroy us." Jesus shut him up. "Quiet, get out of him." The afflicting spirit threw the man into spasms, protesting loudly, and got out. Everyone there was incredulous, buzzing with curiosity. What's going on here? A new teaching that does what it says? He shuts up defiling demonic spirits and sends them packing. And news of this traveled fast and was soon all over Galilee. The word of the Lord. In praise and thanks. If you haven't guessed by now, probably this morning, you will guess that I am a fan of Charlie Brown, or Peanuts. I lift up a panel in which Charlie Brown and his friend Violet are standing side by side talking. And Charlie Brown is happily telling her, "And right after church next Sunday, we're all going on a picnic." The next scene shows Violet remarking, "I didn't know your family belonged to a church." They continued walking in the third panel, and then in the next, Charlie responds, "Sure, doesn't yours?" And the final panel shows Violet and Charlie sitting on a bench, and Violet says with sadness, "They used to, now they belong to a coffee house." Even though that was printed some years ago, perhaps has some bearing today. That it seems that those of the Christian faith, a lot have fallen by the wayside and find more meaning in coffee houses than we do in sanctuaries. Now, the evangelist Leighton Ford, who was former vice president of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association and now head of the Leighton Ford Ministries in Charlotte, North Carolina, says, "See the gospel as story, and that we understand evangelism as living and telling the story of the one who has entered and changed our story, and will do so with theirs, who also encountered his story." That occurred with the man in the synagogue on that Sabbath day, the one with the unclean spirit. He encountered the living Christ, recognized him, and was healed. A simple story with the implications of Jesus' power and authority over all things. At least it's the beginning of the implications that Mark wants us to understand about this man, this Son of God. And so today I will share parts of my story that has changed me and has encountered the Christ. The first story that I share is one that came to mind once again when I saw the riot at the Capitol building at the beginning of January, after hearing of one of the Capitol guards being killed. In that report, it was stated that only 4 guards in the history of the U.S. has been killed at the Capitol building. And 2 of those 4 impacted my ministry. It was in 1998, and I was at my first call in southern Illinois. I was ministering to a congregation that basically was located, for the most part, on the bluffs of the Mississippi River, even though we had 5 or 6 families that lived down in the Mississippi River bottoms. You may recall the flood of 1995, in which the news videos showed a house in the Mississippi River bottoms being torn off its foundation and being floated down the Mississippi River. This was the community that I was ministering to, and it was 3 years after the flood, and they were still in the recovery mode. I had gone out to dinner with my family on a Friday night and was coming home, got into the parsonage. This is prior to my having a cell phone. And basically the phone was ringing off the hook. I immediately answered it when I walked through the door. And it was one of our parishioners that said, "Pastor, you need to get down to Rusty's house immediately." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "There's been a shooting in Washington, and Rusty's son was the individual that did the shooting." I immediately got into the car, drove down to the bottoms, and there was a police barricade already set up. I identified who I was, why I was there, and they let me through. I drove up to Rusty's house, and there were men going in and out of the house, carrying boxes. As I entered in and saw Rusty and his wife sitting there in the living room, they the Secret Service and the FBI that were carting out all the boxes from Rusty Jr.'s bedroom. I didn't know Rusty Jr. When I had come to that community, he was living in Montana or Wyoming, but he had come home that particular week for a brief visit. And as we talked more, I found out that Rusty Jr. suffered from schizophrenia. And this was an extreme form of schizophrenia, because as he was sitting in the living room talking to his family and watching TV, he started describing to them the fact that the voices over the TV were telling him that President Clinton had ordered the FBI and Secret Service to surround their house and that they wanted to kill Rusty Jr. And immediately upon saying that, Rusty went into his bedroom and got his rifle and guns and jumped into his truck and took off. And that was the last that the family had heard until they heard the news of the shooting. I was there with the family until 2 in the morning and finally left, reassuring them that I would be back the following morning. Now, the complexities of ministry is the fact that you wear many hats. And so I kept my promise to return in the morning, but at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I had a wedding that was scheduled. So to move from the hat of comforting a family in tragedy to wearing a hat in which a family was celebrating in joy was quite traumatic for me. The family had written a statement, and they said they wanted to read it to the press because they wanted the public to hear this story of what they were dealing with. But they said they didn't have the courage to go out and face the press at that time, and so handed me the statement and asked me to go out and read it. The police had still set their barricade, but they had alerted the press that there was going to be a statement, and so they were gathered at the barricade, and I quickly drove up to it and got out and read my statement that they had written. Basically, an apology to the nation for what their son had done, acknowledging the fact that they couldn't undo it, although they wished that they could, that their son was sick, but that didn't change the matter that 2 good men in Washington were dead, family men. I can recall talking to my parents in Canton, Ohio, later that day, maybe the next day. And they said, "We couldn't believe it. We saw you on TV reading a statement from the family." And I explained to them in some quick detail of what had happened, the family side of it. But the fact that this family was standing in darkness, that their lives had